Hello, my name is Allison Collier, and I will be presenting on the Kodaly method today. I have a partial certification in Kodaly. I've completed one of my 3 years. So when I saw that this was an option, I grabbed it immediately because Kodaly, particularly Kodaly for secondary ensemble, is something I'm very passionate about. And so this is just a quick quote from Zoltan Kodaly himself. Let us take our children seriously. Everything else follows from this. Only the best is good enough for a child. And so here is me and some of my other first year colleagues back in the summer of 2021. A little side note and somewhat of a joke within the sort of Kodaly community is the way that this is pronounced. A lot of Americans pronounce it Kodaly. It's pronounced Kodaly, as in how could I not use solfege while I'm teaching music? So Kodaly. So to give a sort of demonstration, I want everyone to think back to the time that your parents taught you this specific word. So think about the moment when your parents said, this is called a banana. Now, most likely, you do not have a memory of being formally taught that this is a banana. From the time that you could speak, your brain had already figured out that this yellow sort of long-shaped fruit was called a banana, and that it was relatively sweet, and it usually pairs well with other sweet things, or possibly a few salty things. But in your mind, you know what it tastes good, whether or not you like it, how it tastes, what it looks like, and other things you would pair it with. For example, no one needed to tell you that banana does not go in a trifle.
At it, isn't it beautiful?
Yeah. What is it?
It's a trifle. It's got all of these layers. First, there's a layer of ladyfingers, then a layer of jam, then custard, which I made from scratch. Then raspberries, more ladyfingers, then beef sauteed with peas and onions, then a little bit more custard, and then bananas, and then I just put some whipped cream on top.
Okay, so just a funny clip, but obviously we never had to be formally taught, hey, you're only supposed to use bananas in this context. You're not supposed to put it with beef. You're supposed to put it with sweet things. Yet we somehow instinctively know that. And the reason we know that is because I'm sure as teachers, you all know the struggle of the slide not going when you have a video, but language acquisition is based about experiences. Language acquisition is about experiences, excuse me. So we understand words the best when we have been able to put them in context. And maybe at one point someone sat us down and said, hey, this is what this is called. But we would understand that definition better when we've been able to use it in our own context. And maybe at one point someone told you, hey, this is a plantain. It's kind of like a banana, but you use it in this type of food. But for the most part, you didn't understand that they told you that until you tried a plantain for yourself and you were able to compare it with a banana. And so the reason that we think about language acquisition is that music is a language. And the Kodaly method is all based about how can we make music learning the most like language learning, and the way that we learned language as a child just by absorbing what our parents said to us in our first 2 or 3 years of life. So before we can get into the nitty gritty of what the Kodaly method looks like actively in a classroom, we do need to know a little bit of some background. I'm sure many of you in some sort of introductory music education course, you were taught the big three, being Orff, which is the pitched percussion instrument one, and you were taught Kodaly, which is the solfege one, and you were taught Dalcroze, which is the Eurythmics one. And possibly you got more in depth one of them, especially if you were an elementary school teacher or prospective elementary school teacher. But for the most part, secondary ensemble teachers, we were kind of taught enough information to pass that test in elementary methods. We were not really taught the nitty gritty of what these actually look like in a classroom. To give some historical background, who was Zoltan Kodaly? Zoltan Kodaly was from the country of Hungary, and he lived in the early 20th century. And he was a contemporary. I'll move myself out of the way here. This is Zoltan Kodaly, and he was a contemporary of Bela Bartok. And originally, they were both composers. And what they sought to do was to compose music so that Hungarian folk music could be preserved, because they saw that children learning music in school were tended to be sort of taught from the perspective of the more quote unquote sophisticated music from nearby countries, like France or Italy that have a long historic relevance within the classical music world, and that because of that, that their folk music was being lost, and so they aimed to find ways that they could compose to represent Hungarian folk music, and Zoltán Kodály went all the way to create an entire educational method around it. So what does that look like in an actual classroom? So there's sort of three pillars of the Kodály method, sorry, bad habit. And the first one is singing using solfege or movable do. In the Kodály world, solfege is always movable do, meaning you are in C major. If you're in C major, C is do. If you're in D major, D is do. If you're in E major, E is do. And the way that I have been taught through KIUTC, which I will explain that acronym later, is that officially with the Kodály method, you're also supposed to sing with a relative minor, meaning in A minor, C is do, and in C minor, E flat is do. And I'll explain more why that is when we talk about do, movable do solfege. The other pillar is prepare, present, practice, which is also known as sound before sight. And the other pillar is folk song analysis and notation. Zoltán Kodály and his contemporaries worked on a way that we can analyze folk music and write it down in a way that's natural towards the way that folk music has been taught by generations, but also a way where it can be preserved for future generations. So what does movable do look like in a classroom? So this is clips from Hungarian music classrooms where they are using movable do and then creating a performance featuring folk music. So yes, that's very different from the American classical or the American folk song sound. And originally, when the idea of the Kodály method came to America in the sort of mid 20th century, originally the people who were brought it here were like, oh, so are we supposed to use Hungarian folk music the way that Zoltán Kodály did? And Kodály personally was like, that is not what this is about. You're supposed to take your folk music, find out what are the children singing on the playground? What are the parents singing to them in their home when they're teaching children how to do their chores? What is that music? And how can we use that to teach musical concepts? Which brings us into, well, of course, movable do solfege. So if you're unfamiliar, we have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And the hand signs are just as important as the solfege itself. So what does that look like with folk song analysis and notation? So what we do is we think about what are the children singing on the playground? What are they singing when they're making up games with each other? What are the parents singing to them when they're in their crib trying not to fall asleep? So let's take us an example really quick. So rain, rain. Rain, rain, go away, come again some other day. There are only 3 pitches, and really there's like 2 pitches that are repeated over and over and over again, and another one thrown in. And if we're using solfege, we can analyze that as mi, so, and la. So, mi, so, mi, la, so, mi. Now, then following the Kodály method, what we would do is we start with the most basic songs that use 2 or 3 solfege pitches, usually so mi with a little bit of la, where we kind of start with kindergarten and 1st grade, or 6th grade, or 9th grade, however your system of teaching is. And we get them really, really good at being able to sing mi, so, and la, and even sight reading mi, so, la, and finding it in music and making up games using mi, so, la. But then we get to more complicated music. For example, old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he had a duck, E-I-E-I-O, with a quack, quack here and a quack, quack there, here a quack, there, quack everywhere, quack, quack, old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, which has mi, so, and la in it, but it also has do and re. And if you're smart in catching it, do, re, mi, so, la, so, mi, re, do is the pentatonic scale. So then once students are really, really good at mi, so, and la, then you start introducing pentatonic melodies, and the children are actually actively making notation and even doing dictations using solfege. By the time they're in like 3rd or 4th grade, they can be doing dictations or even sight reading using do, re, mi, sol, la, sol, mi, re, do. So to prove my point, do, 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 sol, la, sol, mi, re, do. So, do, do, sol, la, sol, mi, re, do. Do, 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 do. Do 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 so la la so mi re do. Oh my God. Which brings us to our 3rd pillar of the Kodaly method, which is prepare, present, practice, which is also you can think about as sound before sight. So for example, in early stages, if you have some sort of goal, like I want to work on steady beats with my kids, and the concept of steady beat and how to find the beat in a song. So you might start out by just doing random activities where they are showing the steady beat and they don't even realize it. So some sort of finding some sort of children's song that has a really good steady pulse with it and having them dance around or having them play games with it and they don't even realize that they're working on steady beat. And then one day you have the official present lesson where you are saying, this is the thing, this is called the steady beat, this is called the quarter note, this is called the 8th note, this is called the major scale, this is the C position, whatever the official thing you are teaching. There's one day where you tell them this is what it is called and this is what we are going to call it from now. And then in the weeks after that, we find ways to practice it. Oh no, one of my pictures got lost. Oh well. Oh, there it is. Okay. So we find a way to practice it. We read music that uses that and say, hey, there's that thing that I told you about the other day. You might have sort of a boom whacker lesson, like if you're in elementary school, it's like, okay, well, let's play a song using the boom whackers. Can anyone find the do mi in this song or concepts like that? Or if you're teaching an ensemble class, it's like, all right, here's our sight reading, but we're going to put in crescendos and decrescendos. Where should those crescendos and decrescendos go? Let's look in our repertoire. Where are the crescendos and decrescendos? What does that mean? How are we going to play it? How are we going to sing it? So if you want to learn more about the Kodaly method, this is a plug to look at the Organization of American Kodaly Educators website. This is a picture of the Kodaly Institute at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. They have a 3-week program every single June. And if you go for 3 summers, you get your full Kodaly certification. And I would love to answer any more questions that someone has about Kodaly and specifically how to apply it to secondary ensemble. Thank you.